Hello. Only starting at 3:25. Only each one indelibly revised the idea he was forming of his mistress. He was even given to understand at one point that this laxness in Odette's morals, which he would not have suspected, was fairly well known, and that in Baden and in Nice, when she used to spend a few months there, she had a degree of amorous notoriety. He sought out certain philanderers in order to question them, but they were aware he knew Odette, and besides, he was afraid of reminding them of her, of putting them on her track. But he, to whom before then nothing could have appeared as tedious as anything relating to the cosmopolitan life of Baden or Nice, learning that Odette had perhaps led a rather riotous life in those pleasure towns, though he could never manage to find out if it had only been to satisfy the need for money, which, thanks to him, she no longer had, or from some capricious desire which might return. Now learned with an impotent, blind, dizzying anguish over the bottomless abyss that had now swallowed up those early years of septennat, during which one spent winters on the Promenade d'Anglais, summers under the lime trees of Baden, and in them he saw a painful but magnificent profundity, such as a poet might have lent them, as he would have devoted to the reconstruction of the petty events of the chronicle of the Côte d'Azur of that time. If that chronicle could have helped him understand something of Odette's smile, or the look in her eyes, honest and simple though they were, more passion than an aesthete, examining the extant documents of 15th century Florence in order to penetrate further into the soul of Botticelli's Primavera, Bellavana, or Venus. Often, without saying anything to her, he would gaze at her, he would daydream. She would say to him, "How sad you look." It was not as yet very long since he had moved on from the idea that she was a good person, comparable to the best he had ever known, to the idea she was a kept woman. Inversely, he had sometime since then returned from Odette de Crécy, perhaps too well known among the vast crowd among ladies' men, to this face whose expression was at all times so gentle, to this nature so human. He would say to himself, what does it matter that at Nice everyone knows Odette de Crécy? Reputations of this sort, even if true, are created out of other people's ideas. He would reflect that this legend, even if it was authentic, lay outside Odette, was not inside her like an irreducible or baneful personality, that the creature who might have been led to do wrong was a woman with kind eyes, a heart full of pity for suffering, a submissive body which he had held, which he had clasped in his arms and handled, a woman whom one day he might come to possess entirely, if he succeeded in making himself indispensable to her. She was there, often tired, her face emptied for a moment of that feverish, joyful preoccupation with the unknown things that made Swanns suffer. She would push back her hair with her hand. Her forehead, her face, would appear broader then, suddenly, some ordinary human thought, some good feeling such as may be found in all individuals when in a moment of rest or reclusion they are left to themselves, would spring from her eyes like a beam of yellow sunlight, and immediately her whole face would brighten like a gray countryside covered with clouds which suddenly part, transfiguring it at the moment which the sun goes down. The life that was in Odette at that moment, even the future she seemed so dreamily to be watching, Swann could have shared with her. No evil disturbance seemed to have left its residue there. Rare though they became, these moments were not entirely useless. In memory, Swann joined these fragments together, eliminated the intervals, cast as though in gold, and Odette formed of goodness and calm, for whom, as will be seen in the second part of this story, he later made sacrifices, which the other Odette would never have won from him. But these moments were so rare, and he saw her so little now. Even in regard to their evening meeting, she would tell him only at the last minute if she could grant it to him, for since she could not count on his always being free, she first wanted to be certain that no one else would suggest coming around. She would maintain that she had to wait for an answer of the greatest importance, and if after she had sent for Swann, friends asked her, when the evening had already begun, to meet them at the theatre or at supper, she would give a joyful leap into the air and dress quickly. As she progressed in her preparations, each movement she made would bring Swann closer to the moment when he would have to leave her, when she would fly off with an irresistible force, and when, ready at last, plunging into her mirror a final glance, strained and brightened by attention, she put a little more red on her lips, settled a lock of hair on her forehead, and asked for her sky-blue evening cloak with gold tassels. Swann looked so sad that she could not suppress a gesture of impatience and said, "So that's how you thank me for letting you stay here until the last minute? And I thought I was being nice. I'll know better next time." Now and then, at the risk of angering her, he would promise to try to find out where she had gone. He would dream of an alliance with Forcheville, who would perhaps have been able to enlighten him. In any case, when he knew who it was she had spent the evening with, it was very seldom that he could not discover among all his own acquaintances someone who knew, if only indirectly, the man with whom she had gone out, and could easily obtain this or that piece of information about him. While he was writing to one of his friends to ask him to try to clear up some point or other, he would feel how restful it was to stop asking himself his unanswerable questions, and to transfer to someone else the fatigue of interrogation. True, Swann was scarcely better off when he had certain information. Knowing a thing does not always allow us to prevent it, but at least the things we know we hold, if not in our hands, at any rate in our minds, where we can arrange them as we like, which gives us the illusion of a sort of power over them. He was happy each time Monsieur de Charlus was with Odette. Between Monsieur de Charlus and her, Swann knew nothing could happen. That when Monsieur, or is it Marquis? I forget. Monsieur de Charlus went out with her, it was for the sake of his friendship with Swann, and he would have no reluctance about telling him what she had done. Sometimes she had declared so categorically to Swann that it seemed it was impossible for her to see him on a certain evening. She seemed so keen on going out that Swann attached real importance to Marquis de Charlus's being free to go with her. The next day, though he did not dare ask many questions of Marquis de Charlus, he would compel him, by appearing not quite to understand his first answers, to give him further answers, after each of which he would feel more relieved, because he very soon learned that Odette had occupied her evening with the most innocent of pleasures. "But what do you mean, my dear Mime? I don't quite understand." "You didn't go straight from her house to Musée Grévin? You went somewhere else first?" "No? Oh, how funny! You don't know how much you amuse me, my dear Mime. But what a funny idea of hers to go on to the Chat Noir afterwards. That's certainly her sort of idea." "No, it was you? How strange. But in fact, that's not such a bad idea. She must have known a good many people there." "No? She spoke to no one. That's extraordinary. So you stayed there like that, just the two of you all by yourselves? I can just picture it. You are kind, my dear Mame. I am very fond of you. Swann felt relieved. For him, to whom it had occasionally happened when chatting casually with people to whom he was barely listening, that he sometimes heard certain remarks. For example, I saw Madame de Crécy yesterday. She was with a gentleman I didn't know. Remarks which, as soon as they entered Swann's heart, solidified, hardened like an incrustation, cut into him, never moved from there again. How sweet, by contrast, were these words. She knew no one. She spoke to no one. How they circulated comfortably in him, how fluid they were, easy, breathable, and yet after a moment he would say to himself that Odette must find him quite tiresome if these were the pleasures she preferred to his company. And their insignificance, though it reassured him, nevertheless pained him like a betrayal. Even when he could not find out where she had gone, it would have been enough to soothe the anguish which he felt at these times, and for which Odette's presence, the sweetness of being close to her, was the only specific that in the long run aggravated the disease like many remedies, but at least momentarily soothed his pain. It would have been enough for him if only Odette had permitted it to remain in her house while she was out, to wait for her there until the hour of her return, into whose stillness and appeasement would have flowed and melted like the hours which some magical illusion, some evil spell had made him believe there were different from the rest. But she did not want this. He returned home. He forced himself on the way to make various plans. He stopped thinking about Odette. He even succeeded, while he was undressing, in turning over some fairly cheerful thoughts in his mind. And it was with a light heart, full of the hope of going to see some great painting the next day, that he got into bed and put out his light. But no sooner as he prepared to go to sleep did he cease to exert upon himself a constraint of which he had not even been aware, because it was by now so habitual. Then at that very instant an icy shiver would run through him, and he would again begin to sob. He did not even want to know why. Dried his eyes, said to himself with a smile, "Delightful, I'm turning into a real neurotic." Then he could not think, without a feeling of great weariness, that the next day he would again have to begin trying to find out what Odette had been doing, use all his influence to attempt to see her. This compulsion to an activity without respite, without variety, without results, was so cruel to him that one day, seeing a lump on his abdomen, he felt real joy at the thought he might have a fatal tumor, that he was no longer going to have to take care of anything, that it was the disease that would make him its plaything, until the impending end. And if indeed during this period he often desired death, though without admitting it to himself, it was to escape so much of the acuteness of his sufferings as the monotony of his struggle. And yet he would have liked to live on until the time came when he no longer loved her, when she would have no reason to lie to him, and he could at last learn from her if, on the day when he had gone to see her in the afternoon, she was or was not in bed with Forcheville. Often for several days, the suspicion that she loved someone else would distract him from that question about Forcheville, would make it matter almost of indifference to him. Like those new developments in a continuing state of ill health which seem momentarily to have delivered us from the preceding ones. There were even days when he was not tormented by any suspicion. He thought he was cured, but the next morning when he woke up, he felt in the same place the same pain, the sensation of which, in the course of the preceding day, he had diluted in a flood of different impressions. But it had not moved from its place, and in fact it was the sharpness of this pain that had woken Swann. Since Odette never gave him any information about these very important things, which occupied her so fully each day, although he had lived long enough to know that these things are never anything else but pleasure, he could not try to imagine them for very long at a time. His brain was working with nothing in it. Then he would pass his fingers over his tired eyelids as he would have wiped the glass of his lorgnon, and stop thinking altogether. Yet floating up from that great unknown were certain occupations which reappeared from time to time, vaguely connected by her with some obligation toward distant relatives or friends from an earlier time, who, because they were the only ones she regularly mentioned to him as preventing her from seeing him, seemed to Swann to form the stable, necessary framework of Odette's life. Because of the tone in which she referred from time to time to the day I go to the hippodrome with my friend, if, having felt ill and thought perhaps Odette would be kind enough to come round to the house, he recalled abruptly that this was in fact the very day, he would say to himself, "Oh, no, it's not worth the trouble of asking her to come. I should have thought of it earlier. This is the day she goes to hippodrome with her friend. We must confine ourselves to what's possible. It's pointless wearing oneself out, proposing things that are unacceptable and have already been refused in advance. And the duty incumbent upon Odette of going to the hippodrome, to which Swann thus yielded, did not appear to him merely unavoidable, but the mark of necessity with which it was stamped seemed to make plausible and legitimate everything that was closely or distantly related to it. If, after a man passing on the street had greeted Odette and aroused Swann's jealousy, she answered his question by associating the stranger with one of those two things, with one of the 2 or 3 paramount duties of which she had spoken to him. If, for example, she said, "That was a gentleman who was in the box of the friend with whom I go to the hippodrome," this explanation would calm Swann's suspicions, since he did indeed find it inevitable that the friend would have other guests besides Odette in her box at the hippodrome, but had never tried or managed to picture them. Ah, how would he have liked to know her, the friend who went to the hippodrome, and how he would have liked her to take him there with Odette. How gladly he would have given up all his connections in exchange for any person Odette was in the habit of seeing, even a manicurist or shop assistant. He would have gone to more trouble for that person than for a queen. Wouldn't she have given him, what with she contained of Odette's life, the only effective calmative for his pain? How happily he would have hurried to spend the days at the home of one of those humble people with whom Odette kept up friendly relations, out of either self-interest or true simplicity. How willingly he would have taken up residence forever on the 5th floor of a certain sordid and coveted house to which Odette did not take him, and in which, if he lived there with the little retired dressmaker whose lover he would willingly have pretended to be, he would have had a visit from her almost every day. In these almost working-class neighborhoods, what a modest life, abject but sweet, nourished with calm and happiness, he would have agreed to live indefinitely. It also sometimes happened that when, after meeting Swann, she saw some man approaching her whom he did not know, he could observe on Odette's face the sadness she had shown the day he had come to see her while Forcheville was there. But this was rare, for on the days when, despite everything she had to do, and her fear of what other people would think, she managed to see Swann, what now predominated in her attitude was self-assurance, a great contrast, perhaps, a great contrast, perhaps an unconscious revenge or a natural reaction to the timorous emotion which, in the early days when she had known him, she had felt with him, and even far away from him, when she would begin a letter with these words, "My dear, my hand is shaking so hard I can scarcely write." At least she so claimed, and a little of that emotion must have been sincere to her to want to feign more of it. She liked Swann then. We do not tremble except for ourselves, except for those we love. When our happiness is no longer in their hands, what calm, what ease, what boldness we enjoy in their company. When speaking to him, when writing to him, she no longer used any of those words with which she had sought to give herself the illusion that he belonged to her, creating occasions for saying, "my, mine." And when she referred to him, "You are my property. This is the fragrance of our friendship. I'm keeping it." And for talking to him about the future, about death even, as a single thing that would be shared by the two of them. In those days, to everything he said she would answer admiringly, You will never be like anyone else." She would look at his long face, his slightly bald head, about which the people who knew of Swann's success with women would think, "He's not conventionally handsome, granted, but he is smart. That quiff of hair, that monocle, that smile," and perhaps with more curiosity to know what he was than desire to become his mistress, she would say, "If only I could know what is in that head." Now, to all of Swann's remarks she would reply in a tone that was at times irritated, at times indulgent, "Oh, you really never will be like anyone else." She would look at that head, which was only a little bit more aged now by worry, but about which now everyone thought with that same aptitude which enables you to discover the intentions of a symphonic piece when you have read the program, and the resemblances of a child when you know its parents. He's not positively ugly, granted, but he's absurd. That monocle, that quiff of hair, that smile. Created in their suggestible imaginations, the immaterial demarcation that separates by several months' distance the head of an adored lover from that of a cuckold. She would say, "Oh, if only I could change what's in that head, if only I could make it reasonable." Always prepared to believe what he hoped for, if Odette's behavior toward him left any room at all for doubt, he would fling himself avidly on her words. "Now you can if you want," he would say to her. And he would try to show her that to soothe him, direct him, make him work, would be a noble task to which many other women might ask nothing better than to devote themselves, though it would only be fair to add that in their hands the noble task would have appeared to him only an indiscreet and intolerable usurpation of his freedom. If she did not love me a little, he would say to himself, she would not want to transform me. In order to transform me, she will have to see more of me. Thus he regarded this reproach of her as some proof of interest, of love perhaps, and indeed she now gave him so few that he was obligated to regard as such the various prohibitions she had imposed on him. One day she declared that she did not like his coachman, that he was perhaps turning Swann against her, that in any case he did not show the punctuality and the deference to Swann that she wanted. She felt that Swann wanted to hear her say, "Don't use him any more when you come to see me," as he would have wanted a kiss. Since she was in a good mood, she said it. He was touched. That evening, chatting with Marquis de Charlus, with whom he had the comfort of being able to talk about her openly, for the least bit of conversation he had, even with people who did not know her, always somehow related to her. He said to him, "Yet I believe she loves me. She is so kind to me. What I do is certainly not a matter of indifference to her." And if, when he was setting off for her house, getting in his carriage with a friend whom he was to drop along the way, the friend said, "Why, that's not L'Oradon on the box," with what melancholy joy Swann would answer him, "Oh Lord, no. I tell you I can't use the L'Oradon when I go to the Rue La Pérouse. Odette doesn't like me to use L'Oradon. She doesn't think he suits me." "Well, what do you expect? Women, you know, women. I tell you she wouldn't like it at all. Oh, Lord, yes. If I'd used Remy, there'd be no end of trouble." This new matter, indifferent, distracted, irritable, which was now Odette's manner with him, certainly caused Swann to suffer, but he was not aware of his suffering, since it was only gradually, day by day, that Odette had cooled towards him. It was only by comparing what she was now to what she had been in the beginning that he would have been able to fathom the depth of the change that had taken place. Yet that change was his depth, his secret wound, which hurt him day and night, and as soon as he felt that his thoughts were straying a little too close to it, he would quickly guide them in another direction for fear of suffering too much. He would certainly say to himself in an abstract way, there was a time when Odette loved me more. But he would never look back at that time, just as there was a bureau in his office, which he took pains not to look at, which he made a detour to avoid when he came and went, because in one of its drawers he had locked away the chrysanthemum she had given him that first evening on which he had driven her home, and the letters in which she had said, "If you had forgotten your heart here too, I would not have let you take it back. And at whatever hour of the day or night you need me, send word, and my life will be yours to command." So too there was a place inside him which he never let his thoughts approach, forcing them, if necessary, to make the detour of a lengthy argument, so that they would not have to pass in front of it. This was the place where his memory of the happy days resided. That's where I'm stopping, on page 334.